1 John 5:10. He that believeth on the Son of God hath the witness in himself. He that believeth not God hath made him a liar, because he believeth not the record that God gave his Son. May God bless the reading of his word. Bible smack! Alright, so today I am responding to Marcel. I think it was Marcel E, but I'll have it spelled right if I don't pronounce it right. Anyway, it seems like an African-American guy who is doing some interviews and stuff. Seems to be becoming, obviously secular. I'm going to diagnose him as a secular pantheist. Seems like an atheist, but not really. So he's interviewing. I focused on this one interview. This is like a Christian girl is trying to defend her faith, and I believe she was successful about that. But basically, let's see, make a note there. All right. But I also did look at this other thing of Christian girls trying to defend God. Now, let me go on the first one. I kind of have mixed feelings about this because, on one hand, you seem to be, like the girl that's interviewed, the main one, she seems to be a minor. She just seems really young. I just make that assumption. She seems to be a minor. The guy sounds a little bit older, not like an old man, but I'm saying probably like late 20s, early 40s, somewhere in that range. I think just psychologically, girls might get intimidated, especially, the guys coming off aggressively. Not that that's a moral wrong, okay? I think that, everybody can talk to everybody. There's no problem there. But just the fact that, I think the majority of women would be a little bit shy and intimidated naturally. So that's going to really offset, a good interview. But basically, so he decides to kind of do this interview. And the first interview that's kind of in its own video, I think, is where I don't think she tried to defend. I think she did defend her faith successfully. Now, I think there's two things there. Number one, I've been around the block a little bit, and so, yes, I could find some things to critique, but also I think that from where I'm, guessing her age range is, she was doing it very advanced. She's a very good student of Scripture, as far as it goes, or at least a defender of her theology and faith. But basically, the interviewer comes off very aggressive to her. She comes off rather conservative in her belief system. And I think that he tries to make this thing like, oh, she's trying, and obviously I'm superior. And it is a big facade. It is just fake. Marcel is just, assuming that's the interviewer is the channel guy, but yeah, it's just bullcrap. And I'll tell you why. Because the whole theme is that, you're approaching her about her faith. See, the big new atheism brand, which, as I said, is really inclusive of not just pure atheists, but anybody secular. And so I'm saying he's a secular pantheist. That whole brand is, how are you going to prove it to me? I don't have enough evidence. She doesn't have to prove anything to you to believe. Okay? Just as much as you can't, I can't force you, you can't force her. And really, that's most of the game. All of these questions are really more of a battle of will than they are seeking information. He's not seeking from her. He's wanting to question her authority as opposed to question her for answers. Okay, he's not seeking answers. He's trying to demolish her strongholds. And so she does not have to, go about the process of saying, I have enough evidence for you. It's more of her having enough evidence for her. Okay? So when she says, well, I've read the Bible, and there's messianic prophecies, and, Jesus rose from the dead, and, I have faith, that's good enough. Okay? And this kind of hits the big issue, is that, let me hit this first. So he says, I need evidence, so what? That's your problem. I need evidence. When you are walking down the street and you hear, automobile noises, they might not be anywhere near where you are. Maybe they're a block over. But you do know that there is a possibility that there's an automobile that might be coming up behind you. And it might not even be noticing you, and it might run you over. That is a possibility. And if that is a possibility, it's worth looking into. Okay? If you are on a train track, same thing. More so because that there might be a possibility of survival getting hit by a car, but there's really none if you get hit by a train. Essentially, it's still worth looking into. Okay? So, when you say, I need evidence, so what? Okay, how much evidence are you asking for? And is it really that you need evidence? The thing is that if we have a will, then we will seek out. Okay? Not just that you will have to give me evidence, but I will have to look for it. Okay? I will have to seek this because of the will. You see, the fundamental atheism is really a strong religious revival, okay, of humanism. And it is really calling for atheists to have faith against other religions. Okay. So, in this big revival of the new atheism, they're basically calling people to say, hey, don't be looking at that, don't do this. But essentially, and let me kind of make sure I don't lose my point. When they're doing that, it is all dependent on these things, and there is a will involved. You have to have a will to listen, and the girl pointed that out. She said, look, I have to be willing to listen, and you do too. If I have evidence, you need to listen to my evidence. Okay? But it was obvious that he did not have a will to listen to her evidence. He said, I don't buy that. That's not science. That's referring to the resurrection. Is there scientific evidence for the resurrection? Yep, there is. Why is that? Well, now, there is some discrepancy. We could say it's more historical evidence. But if we're saying science in terms of knowledge, then yes. So scientifically, if we look at the descriptions, okay, if we look at the descriptions, the eyewitness accounts, then you have a Jesus who died. There was no swooning. You could not survive both 39 lashes, then having to immediately, hike with a couple 100 pounds of wood, and then, being hung on a cross. Okay. And then also having your innards taken out and stuffed with 75 pounds of herbs. That does not have a formula for survival. Okay. We know that he died in a particular place in the tomb. The tomb was sealed. Okay, there was no switcheroo or anything going around with that. He had 2 armed guards, keeping that a permanent possibility. And so then you have him resurrecting. You have people, 500 people witnessing him. Okay, eyewitnesses. Probably due to interrogation, because at the time, Paul and others were interrogating people and really, imprisoning people who claimed that the resurrection was true. So basically, you have this whole system, and then you have the 12 apostles themselves, who would know for a fact if he was faking somehow, if they faked his death, or if he was, just took his body and just making up lies and stuff like that. And all of them, 100% of them, dying for their conviction that he was true. If it was an obvious lie like that, if it was an obvious conspiracy, you would figure one of them would crack, because they were getting nothing out of it. They weren't getting any riches out of it. They were being punished by death. So, and there's a lot to, more evidence to back up all those assertions and things. Also, various historical records of him existing by secular authors who did not believe in him. Okay. Well, anyhow, the biggest deal, though, is not the abstract, okay, because this is dealing with her faith, and this is the big problem. Why her faith is evidence. Her faith is evidence because it is supplying her needs, and it's not just supplying her needs, but the needs of every class of society, every race, every wealth class, every government class, every type of human being throughout every century since has had this need and had it fulfilled through Christianity. Okay? And there's a combination of both rules and order, and then grace and mercy, and then the byproducts of peace and really bringing people to do good things, correcting societies over time. Is there a connection to the fact that there was a great awakening in New England, and then after that fact, there was an emancipation of slaves? Okay? An abolition of slavery after the awakening. Is, when you look at these things, the healing of racial division is something that, happened religiously. Dr. King was Minister King, okay? And, these healings happen, and, Billy Graham just died, and he also had a part in that, during that time, working with people of different races to come together in the Crusades. These are evangelistic crusades, not the Catholic ones. But basically, when you see that byproduct, that is what's happening to people through Christianity, and that's the worldview they have to deal with. You have to go through life. You have to go through experience. The question doesn't start off, let's make up an abstract reality and figure out which metaphysic works. Okay? Life is, here is the realm, here are the problems, how do you solve the problems? The naturalistic worldview, the secular humanist religion, does not satisfy these problems. Okay? And when you say, I need evidence, real people in the real world need evidence. And so the evidence they find to get through this life is being found in the Christian worldview and not in the atheistic worldview. And what I mean is that by a natural worldview, when you have these problems of society and death, okay, what you find is oh, you have a physical problem, here is a drug, here is surgery, and that's it. When you have a spiritual problem, what do they say? Well, here's psychology. And psychology is a study of the mind, but it has no morals. And the problem is that we live by wisdom, not by knowledge. Psychology cannot obtain wisdom. It tries, but it cannot complete that. And why is it that psychology cannot find the answer of wisdom? Because wisdom relies on morality. And morality, though they wouldn't have a problem having their own morality, and that's an attempt that's being used right now, morality is based in spirituality. And ultimately, spirituality has to find its place in God. Now, there are alternative spiritualities, alternative moralities, and those just don't work. It just plays out that way. And so, when you have this revival of atheism, it's really just because of alternative spiritualities, alternative moralities, these alternative religions that are the problem. Now, so we have, this subjective empirical evidence, and that's what they start off with. And we also have the subjective empirical failure. Okay, Christianity works, atheism doesn't. Okay, it just doesn't. Why is atheism popular? Because they find the liberty of ignoring the problem of sin. Instead of saying, I'm immoral and there's a failure, well, it was mommy and daddy's fault, or I've got a genetic problem, or blah, blah, blah. Okay? You could always shift the blame. And you can say, I could do what I want to do, and who needs society to fix me, and so they start, loosening up social laws, and then evil comes about. And so now we have this epidemic of drug addiction. Okay, because man is not, equipped with the spirit, apparently. So then you just use chemicals and everything will be okay. Well, then you get doctors who end up giving people chemicals to make things okay, giving people painkillers that end up being addictive, and then other drugs start coming in. And so now we have a wave of death. Thanks. Thanks, fundamental atheists. That's great. You have pushed society in this, the leftist direction, and now they are, reacting to it, and they're dying. So, anyhow, he kind of mentions the 1 + 1 = 2. And she says, look, I believe that 1 + 1 = 2, but if God had made it differently, it would be different. If God had made logic and 1 + 1 = 3, then that's the way it would be. Now, he was like, haha, I've got it. This is where you're just totally illogical, blah, blah, blah. No. She said the way this world runs is that 1 + 1 = 2. But he sets the rules. This is a symptom of his problem, not hers. You see, if we add a cube of ice and the same space of an exploding fire, and we put them together, do we get 2? We've added the ice and the fire. Do we get 2? No. We would get steam that would leave into the gas, and then there would be nothing. So 1 and 1, you have to assign a value to these things. Okay? And what do we call 1? I mean, you could say, well, if it's not completely 2, then it's only 1. So 1.9 plus 1.9 equals, 3, maybe even more. 3.8. So basically, when we start talking about these values, we assign a value. Not only do the words 1 plus 1 equals 2, we didn't just make up the words, but the values, okay, of these words are something we impose. If you see a forest full of trees, which tree is number 1 and which tree is number 2? You have cherry-picked. You have picked a value for 1 and picked a value for 2. So in order to make it equal 2. Alright? So there is subjectivity, even in the very basics. Now, 1 plus 1 equals 2 should be, so obvious and so apparent and so true, right? 1 plus 1 equals 2. Alright? But if it's math, then 345,000 minus 276 plus 785.99952 times pi divided by 4 plus 778 is... Now, if you don't have that right off the bat, why is it? Because it's still a number. It's still a calculation. You're trying to figure it, aren't you? And I don't care what the answer is. The fact is that you were taught to believe that 1 plus 1 equals 2 is why you can reference it so quickly. You did not go through the problem as of yet, and maybe eventually y'all with the calculators will get there too at some time. But basically, it takes time to do that because of what? Because you are calculating, you are trying to make sure you're getting this right and all that kind of stuff. But it was not a belief, okay? You don't have to think when it comes to being taught 1 plus 1 equals 2. You just have faith, okay? Alright, now, let's see here. Yeah, the big deal is that God is transcendent, unlike other gods. All these other gods in pantheism are subject, okay? God transcends all things, all the universe, not just the universe, but all the laws of science, all time and physics and everything like that, in metaphysics. Everything that is was made by Him, okay? Every concept comes from Him. So there was Him, and there was no thing but Him. It was all Him. All that was Him. And He made things. Okay? And these things are inclusive of the laws. Where did the laws come from? Where did time come from? It came from God. These are all subjective things. God is not subjective. Okay? God is the objective because He is the infinite. And so when you say, where was God? Why? Because you are a pantheist. And not just a pantheist, but a presuppositional pantheist. You impose your pantheism without actually learning definitions. That is the problem, because you're telling people, well, you presuppose this and you presuppose that. You are the ultimate fideist. You have so much faith in your system that you trust it in a way to not even knowing that you're even trusting it. I mean, there is a lot of ultra faith. This is superstitious. This is the other girls that were presented in the other video. There's a African-American girl, seemed to be church-going Christian, but I'd say she was a postmodernist. That's why she's using this term of your truth, okay? When she's questioning, she says, this is my truth. That's your truth. This is what I understand. This is what you understand. And eventually, she has to deal with tough questions, like, what about, am I going to hell or not? And ultimately, she does get rebuked, even though she does seem to be more stronger in her faith than the other two. In fact, one of the girls didn't even profess to be Christian. Maybe both of them. I mean, these were not the model, standard bearer apologists or anything like that. All right, but yeah, so you had this postmodern girl, and she was defending her faith in a way that was more of a Oprah Christian liberal New Age. Okay, in other words, like her faith was really a subset of New Age postmodern belief more than it was of Christianity, even though she was practically Christian. Okay, she had a Bible, she reads, stuff like that, but she was really swept up under the overall framework of a this is my truth, this is your truth foundation. The other girl, she kind of showed some things that she had a horrible background, and she's just trying to survive life. I think there was foster care involved and stuff. But basically, she kind of revealed that, like, she does believe in God, not very strongly, but she does. She kind of had a Catholic background, and she was also a practicing lesbian. And basically, this kind of deals with the problem of psychology, because he asked her, he's like, well, aren't you going to think you'll eventually give up God? Because, I mean, you're a lesbian. But you're going to give up God. So, here is the duel, okay? My lifestyle is not fitting with organized religion. So, it's obvious to be more consistent with my lifestyle, then I just give up on God, okay? Man, I would really love to have, like, been able to contact that girl and have a conversation with her. But basically, this is the rub, okay? And this is why atheism fails. And she said, no, I'm settled, I believe in God. I might give up Catholicism, but, I'm not giving up on, Christianity. And why is that? He's like, well, and she said, like, I've got problems, everybody's got problems. Her lifestyle is not the essential. God in her life is more essential. Hopefully that'll work out to where, she grows in her faith and eventually learns to trust the Bible and gets rid of, her lifestyle. But in the meantime, which one is rooted? Okay. Obviously, our lifestyle is something that can change, okay? The power of atheistic thought cannot change it. So the psychologists, they say, okay, we'll replace morality with this psychologic, okay? With this mind and logic, we're going to work our way out of that. But it has no moral authority, okay? Why? Because moral authority is based in spiritual authority. And they have no spiritual authority because they're starting from a secular starting point. Now, I know that many have incorporated spirituality since the days of Freud, but Freud still is the headpiece, the foundation of psychological work. And, Jung enters there too, but they're both evolutionists, okay, which is still naturalism. So, going back to it, they just see, hey, this is physical, there's nothing you can do about it. We just have to figure a way to work around it. We can't change that. Why? Because you can't have any spiritual power. And without spiritual power, you don't have spiritual authority. Spiritual authority dictates morality, and morality dictates wisdom. Okay? Logic, alright, and, knowledge and stuff like that, they can influence, but they don't control wisdom. Because wisdom, what you need to get through life is wisdom. And wisdom is based in morality, which is based in spirituality. Which ultimately has to be based in revelation. Okay? When it's not based in revelation of the Bible, then it loses out to all these crazier systems of spirituality, because there's angels, but there's demons. Okay? So that's how that works out. And then you had Science Girl. Science Girl, I don't think she really confessed herself to be a Christian at all. Okay? But it was kind of funny because he shows his inability to be objective when he's dealing with her, because she says that she does believe in God because working in her laboratory, she studies proteins, and she's amazed by just how complex they are. That the complexity indicates that there's design. And so if there's design, there has to be a designer. And so from her scientific evidence, she says, it looks like I believe in God. And he scolds her on that. I'm a man of science. How dare you? Why? Because it's a bait and switch. Science is not the scientific method. Okay? In his worldview, when he says science, he means humanistic religion. And they impose the humanistic religion. And he's like, you know this, and you taught that, and she's like, yeah. So what? So basically, you're not supposed to believe the evidence. Why? Because you have a metaphysical faith in naturalism. Okay? And that then thwarts his whole thing. And you did this, and you probably got it from your family. Back to the first video with the Christian. You probably got it from your family. Well, so what? You know what family means? It means that this is the person who has dedicated themselves to helping my survival throughout my life growing up. And they have an invested interest in me. So they mean well when they want to tell me the worldview. Okay? Doesn't guarantee that they're objective, but it does guarantee that they are doing this for good. Okay? Or at least good intentions. Because I know that there are people who are utterly wrong, okay, but they will do it with the good intention, that they do mean good for their kids, okay. So, basically, if you are trying to work through life and your personal experience, you do need to listen to your parents. You do need to consider their opinion, okay. You can reject their opinion, that's fine, because maybe they are wrong. But at least they have an invested interest versus the stranger. Okay? When you go up to the university and you say, okay, I'm paying a vast fortune to this person. Well, what happens is that you become enslaved because you're paying a fortune. How'd that work? Well, if I'm like rich and I buy 20 acres of lawn, what happens? Then I have to pay somebody to mow that lawn. Okay, or I can mow it myself, but then I still got to buy a tractor. I got to spend all day. Okay, and time is money. So what happens? Well, basically, you are enslaved to your university. And you will be working for that university to pay off your student loans. Okay? Or doing whatever you had to do to get the scholarships to begin with. And so that's why people are believing this crap. Okay? It's not true at all. We talked about those proteins. The fact is that I was just doing some research recently on Ernst Haeckel, who was the guy who was really the evolution guy for Germany. Okay? That's why the Germans turned to evolution, was because of Haeckel. Okay? And he was hanging out with Darwin and all that stuff. Okay? He was, unlike Darwin, he was a scientist, a zoologist, discovered 200 species or something like that. And he said, look, if spontaneous generation is not true, which is also called abiogenesis, then the only other theory is special creation. Okay? What's that mean? Well, it means it was a miracle that God did. Okay? It has to be abiogenesis. Alright? So now all these modern Darwinists are saying, no, that is something totally different. Darwinism is just dealing with species and how species move to another species. Really? So all animals are related. And where do they get that? We get that from this idea of the tree of life in evolution, the evolutionary tree of life, where it all comes from that one trunk. And who made that picture first? Ernst Haeckel. So our concept is that all species are related, which implies that they all descended from one. And if that didn't happen, then the whole thing falls apart. That means, all right, now that we're dealing with cells that have over 1 trillion parts that are intricately quilted together, okay, there's layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, about 5 layers, and everything's intricately knitted together, and everything's got information, reads like a book, okay, you alter the letters, you destroy the message, that, oh, and it heals itself too, but that's, basically, when you get into that level of complexity, you know, Ernst Haeckel's idea where the sea had these, you know, little pieces of chemical that became mucus, okay, doesn't work anymore. The junk DNA doesn't work anymore. Evolution doesn't work anymore, okay. So it is all collapsed. It is all failed. All right, catch you later.